equals wealth, wealth equals power. These are inequalities that we associate with the third world today.
With change comes danger.
Tonight at 7.
On Masterpiece Classic.
Edith has had an invitation to write a newspaper column.
When may she expect an offer to appear on the London stage?
I'm always a failure in this family. I thought you might work here for a while. Are you sure you thought about this, ma'am?
Mrs. Crawley has hired a prostitute.
So Vera planned for you to be hanged for her suicide. It was her revenge.
Mr. Barrows is so familiar all the time, there's likely time to keep his distance.
What are you implying?
Downton Abbey on Masterpiece Classic.
Tonight at 9.
To form a more perfect union,
Perish all compromises with tyranny.
they tore the nation apart.
They're going to be butchered because that's Old Testament retribution.
The armory at Harper's Ferry. Come with me, Douglas.
Douglas suddenly becomes the most wanted man in the United States.
The conclusion of the abolitionists on American Experience.
Tonight at 10.
It started out as a normal day in a campaign. It went to hell.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot outside
Police worried about the whole city exploding.
That city was gonna blow.
I thought, oh my God, they're gonna kill him.
What we need in the United States is not hatred, but is love and compassion toward one another.
It's the little-known story of a speech that would create a ripple of hope.
Tonight at 11.
Next time from Boston, Massachusetts, it's Antiques Roadshow.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, love that. Oh my gosh.
Don't miss our visit to Beantown next time on Antiques Roadshow.
Monday night at 8.
Hi, I'm Mark Wahlberg. Next time on Market Warriors, Miller suggests vandalism.
Oh, I don't want to scratch it. Let's get a pin and try to scratch it real quick.
And what is it?
It's chrome, mid-century modern. It's so cool.
All this and more next time on Market Warriors.
Monday night at 9. Here's what's coming up tonight on WGCU TV. You're watching WGCU TV, PBS for Southwest Florida, a member-supported service of Florida Gulf Coast University.
Commentary with JevichS.com, J-EFFS.com.
The McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk. The McLaughlin Group is brought to you by Siemens. Across the country, we're building answers for hospitals, utilities, cities, and factories. And we're building them to last. Siemens Answers.
Just wanted to check and make sure that we are on schedule.
The first technology of its kind
Mom and Dad, I have great news.
is now providing answers families need. Siemens Answers. We believe that if love is a chemical reaction, chemistry has a good chance to make the world a more harmonious place. Chemistry works so that bandages end up loving the water. Families are less afraid of energy bills. And even cars and clean air get along better. That's why we don't just make chemicals, we create chemistry. BASF, the chemical company.
Issue 1, Ben Cosby Revisited.
I take responsibility, and nobody is more committed to getting this right.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton gave the details of that responsibility this week at 2 congressional hearings, one in the Senate, one in the House. on what happened at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, Libya 4.5 months ago on September 11th. 4 Americans were killed in the attack, including the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens. Secretary Clinton became emotional as she described the scene at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C.
I stood next to President Obama as the Marines carried those flag-draped caskets off the plane at Andrews. I put my arms around the mothers and fathers, the sisters and brothers, the sons and daughters, and the wives left alone to raise their children.
In Libya, before the attack, Ambassador Stevens cabled the State Department asking for more security. At the hearing, the Secretary was asked about how this request and others like them from the U.S. Embassy in Libya were handled.
The specific security requests pertaining to Benghazi, were handled by the security professionals in the department. I didn't see those requests. They didn't come to me. I didn't approve them. I didn't deny them.
Hearing this, Senator Rand Paul on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee said this to the Secretary.
Had I been president at the time, and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable.
Senator Ron Johnson, charged the administration with falsifying details of the assault.
We were misled that there were supposedly protests and then something spraying out of that, an assault spraying out of that. And that was easily ascertained that was not the fact. And the American people could have known that within days, and they didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator.
Is she right? What difference does it make? Or is she wrong?
I think it does make a difference, John, but I think she handled herself extremely well. Look, there are 3 questions. Why was security not provided despite the pleas? Why was help not sent to these guys over 7 hours of attacks? And who's responsible for the massive cover-up and fake stories about this video, anti-Muslim video? And she said to the third, I had nothing to do with the talking points. I have nothing to do with the military. I take responsibility for the lack of security. However, all these memos and cables that came, they all didn't come into my office personally, but I take responsibility. I think she handled it well, John, and the issue, I think, is pretty much gone now, and the Republicans did not succeed in what they were trying to do.
How would you describe Hillary Clinton at the House?
Her head was bobbing up and down.
What kind of an adjective would you use?
I would say she was commanding. I would say she was presidential. She came across very much as someone who was shouldering responsibility, but she also avoided taking any of the blame. That was a very good balancing act, and she handled all of the questioning, and I thought she brought some reality to this. The Republicans say, oh, the State Department could easily have known what was happening. First of all, what we've learned since is this outpost was basically a CIA operation. You don't talk about these things in public. The right wing had this fantasy that they were watching the demonstrations and the attack unfold in real time on video. I mean, none of that happened. And she, I think, really turned back the notion that this was a manipulative event on the part of the administration to deny that this was a terrorist attack. I mean, this was basically something that happened in a very chaotic situation. The Republicans tried to turn it into Watergate, and it didn't work.
She also waited a few months, which is not what Susan Rice did, and Susan Rice got into deep trouble.
I disagree with it a little bit.
In other words, she held off before saying anything about it for a couple of months.
Well, she had nothing to do with the aftermath, John.
Who didn't?
Susan Rice, that's all the aftermath.
You don't understand me. Susan Rice went on television early.
She was sent out to do it, and Hillary
She did, and Hillary waited and waited, and she did, that helped her.
Well, she escaped the heat. She escaped the initial heat of all this, and she had a lot of time to think of a good way to kind of get out of the blame game here. And really, this hearing, I think the worst thing about this hearing was, aside from the politics, is we still walked away without any answers here. I mean, there are, yes, 4 dead Americans, and one of whom was pleading for extra help, extra security from the State Department, and he didn't get it. And there were no clear answers as to why. All we got out of it was that Hillary Clinton was not to blame.
Hillary Clinton has traveled almost 1,000,000 miles since she's been Secretary of State.
Running from Washington.
That means that she's been absent from the State Department. However, with modern technology, that should be no problem, but there is something missing when there is no physical presence. Do you think that she ought to be, there should be some, this is a serious question, there should be some evolution, either in our thinking about the role of the, no other person in her position has traveled that much and been away that much. Should that be a presidential envoy, special assignment, special condition, as separate from her cabinet position?
You know, in that particular role, dealing with our foreign policy, there is no substitute for having the Secretary of State develop personal relationships and get a direct feel from the people that she is trying to deal with and try to get to move towards an American position, whatever that may be. So I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can send a substitute. It just goes with the territory. The Secretary of State has to be prepared to travel all around the world. Those personal relationships are critical for the ability of the United States to bring people along with her.
She stands alone. No other Secretary of State has ever traveled that much.
No, they've
never been away that much.
No, maybe not that much, but Secretaries of State have been traveling a heck of a lot more.
Are you saying that she has redefined the Secretary of State's position and role?
No. I think what she does, okay, is a part and has been a part of the Secretary of State's role.
Not to the extent that she has. I bet they haven't even traveled a quarter of John, you ought to have somebody there.
She surpassed a predecessor. I think it was Madeleine Albright who held the record previously.
What was her record? What was Albright's record?
Hillary just passed that.
This is 1,000,000 miles. John,
excuse me. Hillary just passed that record in the last couple of months. So it's not that big a deal.
John, what you're
saying?
Pat,
please, I would like to finish. In terms of the accountability here, there was an accountability board that she appointed that reported that calls for like 29 different reforms, which goes step by step where it was broken down, and maybe she should have read those cables, and I would hope that John Kerry
doesn't have to read them if they're sent to her by
John, let me talk
enhanced technology.
John, let me talk to your point if we can.
She's not going to read every
Let me talk to your...
but the cable was addressed to her. We have a copy of the cable.
John, let me talk to your point. You're exactly right. If she's going to do this 1,000,000 miles of travel, there ought to be an executive deputy of hers at the State Department in the building.
I'm sure she had that.
Why didn't he or she have the cables and read them?
Those people lost their jobs because they didn't perform.
This is all the nitty-gritty here. The overall problem with what happened in Libya was that the Obama administration didn't want us to be heavily armed there because we were trying to develop a relationship and they wanted to look as though we were, a little unfriendly.
Yeah, right.
Okay, Africa. Let's get into that.
That's ridiculous.
Africa, what's the big picture?
Benghazi did not happen in a vacuum. The Arab revolutions have scrambled power dynamics and shattered security forces across the region. Instability in Mali has created an expanding safe haven for terrorists who look to extend their influence and plot further attacks of the kind we saw just last week in Algeria.
What happened last week in Algeria, North Africa, was the murder of at least 37 hostages, including 3 Americans, after militants attacked a natural gas plant in the eastern part of the country. The Al-Qaeda splinter group called the Signers with Blood Brigade, led by Mokhtar Belmokhtar, claimed responsibility.
Question, is the volatility in North Africa an outcome of the Arab Spring, or does it predate the Arab Spring? Patrick.
John, some of it predates the Arab Spring, but what this shows and what the Hillary thing was about is the complete disaster of what we did in Libya. We dumped over this corrupt dictator, and all these forces moved out of there. They went into the Tuareg rebels, went into Mali. You've got Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb now moving all through that region. They're in Mauritania, they're in Niger. And the point of the whole thing, when you go back to this, what happened in Benghazi, John, the point of this is that the administration covered up the fact that Al-Qaeda was not on the run, it was not on the path to defeat, it was responsible for what happened in Benghazi, and it is all over the place now.
We're letting the French handle things now. I think it's more kind of leading from behind on foreign policy. And it's incredibly dangerous because, like Pat was saying, Al-Qaeda is not on the run.
You ain't letting the French handle things.
Nothing's being done about it. North Africa is
French didn't ask anybody in the Obama administration for any help. They didn't want Obama knowing about it.
Espouse, or there are cells all over the place. And I think the administration...
They knew how to handle it, just like the Algerians knew how to handle it.
They're not going to put boots on the ground. They're going to assist the French. The French have more of an interest in Mali than we do. And you're going to see more use, probably, of drones, which is controversial in and of itself. But the administration is not ignoring this area. And all of the critics are out there saying, do this, do this, do this.
Really?
Like what? Nobody really has any great answers.
I have a question for you. Africa is rich in natural resources. The Chinese know that. The Chinese have penetrated a lot of Africa. Are we missing the boat?
Well, I don't know that we're missing the boat, but certainly China is in a very different position than us, and they have the people who can go in there and live in that kind of an environment.
What does that mean?
It means it's a much more difficult...
So what does it mean about the Chinese you're talking about?
They have a huge appetite for the kind of natural resources, and they're willing to...
And we don't?
Oh, no, we do, but we have other sources, okay, than the Chinese do. And the fact is that this is something that gives them a primary call on a lot of the resources of that region. They put in a lot of money. We haven't been willing to do that, nor have we wanted to put boots on the ground.
Well, we got two reasons for being there. One, Africa, as you point out, is the central front with Al-Qaeda. Number two, these resources that we really have not been attending to in any fashion resembling the Chinese. Is that true?
Chinese will deal with anybody. They're right there in the Sudan. Any place they will go and deal with anybody.
They were in Africa.
They put cash on the barrelhead. They're all over Latin America. They're all over Africa, John. They are dealing in a commercial, mercantile way with these regimes, and we have a foreign policy that deals supposedly with
enough of Africa. Enough of Africa. Change of venue. Israel. Meet Yair Lapid. Benjamin Netanyahu won a re-election, but it was a squeaker. A new arrival on the scene is TV personality, author, journalist, and politician Yair Lapid, who leads Israel's Yesh Atid party. Question more. Why has Netanyahu lost steam, and what's behind the emergence of Yair?
Well, this is a very interesting evolution in Israeli politics. There's no doubt that the election, in fact, was a defeat for Netanyahu. And
meaning what? He won the election.
He may be the next prime minister. His party went down from 40. No. Netanyahu. Netanyahu's party, his own party, went down from 42 seats to 31 seats. So in fact, his party, the Likud party, had fewer seats. This guy came out of nowhere. It's his first time running for office, and he got 19 seats. He became the second most important party out of nowhere. And so he has become the star of this thing, okay? And Netanyahu is going to have to make a deal with him and form a coalition. All of Israeli politics are splintered, but it's never been anything like this. And now Netanyahu is going to have to move, if I may say so, because he had so much pressure from the far right. This is now a center-right. It's going to be a much more pragmatic and a much more open government.
How long is this term? Until
5 years.
It can be as much as 5 years, but it almost never lasts 5 years because the
coalition. How long do you think he's going to be prime minister?
I think he'll be prime minister for the next 3 years at least.
What happened to Olmert? What happened to Olmert? I thought he was going to do something.
Oh, listen, Olmert, in my judgment, if Olmert had been the prime minister, or Sharon had been the prime minister, or Rabin had been the prime minister, you would have had a settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian.
Yeah, Lapid did not exactly come out of nowhere. He's been a popular on-camera broadcaster. His father created a centrist party. He looks like an Israeli George Clooney, and he's really captured the imagination of the young. In part, his main issue was that the ultra-Orthodox should not be exempt from military service. And so I think he's a critical player here going forward.
I just want to know whether Netanyahu is reductively true. This is
no, John.
Not now.
Good for him. No. I think Netanyahu may be on the way out. I think we'll see how this government works.
John, he's going to put together a coalition.
Very different political pressures from within his own cabinet. That you're going to have. It's not going to be from the right now, okay? It's going to be from the center. It's going to be
from the right. Look, you got Lapid. You got Lapid's party's going to be there. Netanyahu's going to be there. His own partner in there, who's a far rightist, and Naftali Bennett, or the Shas party's going to be there.
What's the point?
It's a coalition coming of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Issue 2, Inauguration Day. We, the people,
declare today that the most evident of truths, that all of us are created equal, is the star that guides us still. Just as it guided our forebears through Seneca Falls and Selma and Stonewall, just as it guided all those men and women, sung and unsung, who left footprints along this great mall, to hear a preacher say that we cannot walk alone, to hear a king proclaim that our individual freedom is inextricably bound to the freedom of every soul on earth.
On Inauguration Day, Monday, President Barack Obama gave his second inaugural address to the nation. It ran 18 minutes
speaking to
and was
the right
delivered
side of his
before a
trade
throng of hundreds of thousands assembled on the National Mall.
Question: was President Obama's speech unabashedly liberal? I ask you, Susan Sarikyan.
Of course. It was everything he said, from talking about gay marriage, immigration reform. All these things are part and parcel of the liberal agenda. It was, and if anything, a lot of people were saying, if you're reading Twitter at the time, people were saying, wow, this is surprising that he's really willing to go right into gay marriage. He's the first person in an inaugural speech to say the word gay. I mean, it was very liberal.
Well, this is the problem that the Republicans face. If they think all these great issues of the day are solely the province of the Democratic Party and liberalism, they're never going to win another election. I think the president did a great job rooting these ideals and these values in the great traditions of the past, in references to the founding fathers, talking about Dwight Eisenhower, presidents. It was a stirring speech that will go down in history.
If you think the Stonewall riot in the gay bar in Greenwich Village can be traced all the way back to Bunker Hill and the Founding Fathers, you don't read what the Founding Fathers believed or said.
Okay, let's play another bite. Let's play another bite of the president. Excuse me, let me play another bite of the president. A living document.
The president alluded frequently to the U.S. Constitution, the nation's founding document, one that the president made clear is not set in stone.
We have always understood that when times change, so must we. That fidelity to our founding principles requires new responses to new challenges. Being true to our founding documents does not require us to agree on every contour of life. It does not mean we all define liberty in exactly the same way, or follow the same precise path to happiness. Progress does not compel us to settle centuries-long debates about the role of government for all time, but it does require us to act in our time.
Question: given this passage, is there any doubt in your mind that President Obama's view is that the U.S. Constitution is antiquated?
I wouldn't say antiquated, but I would say that it's past time for people to hide behind the Constitution and fail to face the challenges of today. And the most immediate issue that comes to mind, of course, is gun violence. And to rely on a Second Amendment that basically talks about creating militias to put down rebellions, to apply that today to an unfettered right to have assault weapons with 30 or 60 rounds so you can go out and gun down little children, that then the Constitution can be interpreted in a more or less way.
Don't you think he's doing us a favor by reminding us that it is a living document and it must be accommodated to the conditions of today? But that doesn't necessarily have to be ripped apart or ignored in any respect.
I agree with both sides of what you just said, but it is a living document. It has been evolving throughout the history of this country. The courts ultimately are going to be the deciders, as we say, over how far it can go and how far a government can go, but that there is no doubt that we have allowed this Constitution and nurtured this Constitution as a living document because conditions change in the country.
But John, he is claiming, this owner calls it his revolution.
Constitutional
the roots of this revolution were gay rights, and modern feminism, all the rest. They go back to the 1960s. They do not go back to the Constitution of the United States, which was written by people who did not believe in equality.
Are they consistent with the Constitution?
The word equality is not in the Constitution, it's not in the Bill of Rights, and it's not in the Federalist Papers.
Does that mean it's excluded from the thinking of the Founding Fathers?
What Eleanor's talking about, the revolution, is a modern thing, and it can't be traced.
Does he mean that as a living document, you can find it in the Constitution, but it's not going to be obvious?
He can put it in the Constitution by subterfuge but it's not there.
Well, revolution is not a modern thing. Revolution goes back to the beginning of this country. And
you cannot have a document.
Let's put it in.
The tone when talking about the Constitution during that speech was a little bit dismissive. Like, yeah, there's a Constitution, but look, we can work around it. I mean, that's just...
Do you share that view? Did she use the word dismissive? Do you
I think you're exactly right. I think she's exactly right.
I thought no, it was reverential towards our beginnings and our Constitution and our forefathers.
Was it dismissive at all?
No, reverential.
Look what happens. This is a constitutional document, so we have to pay it appropriate reverence. But it cannot be frozen. Otherwise, our country would come to a halt on so many ways. So it is the role of government and ultimately the role of the courts, as we saw in the 1930s. Okay? To allow for some...
In point of fact, we have treated it as a living document.
Absolutely.
And but it works. It works nevertheless. Because the seeds of for example, the women's right to vote and all of that. All of that is there, but it's not really antiquated in the form of buried. It's living, and that's the point he wanted to make.
It's living in the circumstances that you
in some ways in the context of the modern time.
I think it was right on.
The idea of the founders put it in modern context.
General Dempsey and I are pleased to announce that we are eliminating the direct ground combat exclusion rule for women.
Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, joined by the chairman.
Comcast.
find it. I didn't find any. Don't let them collect the money.